white snake root. I don't know about the snake root part where that comes from, but the interesting thing about this plant is when it's grazed upon by dairy cattle, it makes the cattle's milk poisonous, creating a condition that used to be called milk fever. People recognized that it was something in the milk that was making people sick, but it took a while to eventually figure out it's this plant that does it. Doesn't kill the cow, but it makes their milk poisonous. It is said that Abraham Lincoln's mother died from milk fever from this plant. Yeah. Farmers now know if they do allow their cattle, dairy cattle, to graze in open pastures, because it's sometimes out in the open besides being in woods, to try to get this plant out of there. But again, because the number of cows, the milk is diluted by so many sources, it's not a problem anymore.
Hackberry, and I love the bark. I think it's so distinctive and so interesting. These trees are related to elms, but they're not susceptible to Dutch elm disease. So oftentimes I found in forests that had elm dominating the understory and a few hackberries here and there, when Dutch elm disease came through and wiped out all the elm, those hackberries would kind of sneak in and start to take over that role in the understory. They do have really beautiful wood. It usually just gets mixed in with other woods as far as lumber goes, but I just think it's got really, it gets a berry on it. It's not a fruity, fleshy berry. It's kind of a hard berry, but birds and other animals use it as a food source. So it is planted ornamentally as a terrace tree along streets a lot. It's very tolerant to salt from salting roads, or the pollution from cars and so forth. So it's planted ornamentally as a yard and street tree as well. Really a diverse tree as far as where they grow. I've seen them growing on the edges of wetlands, and I've seen them growing on the growing basically out of rocks on a hilltop where there doesn't even appear to be any soil. They're very diverse as far as, and they're very slow growing too. So they come back in 20 years, they probably look like they're about the same size.
Yeah.
Wow. They are, interestingly, the alternate host for a disease called cedar apple rust. So if you have an apple orchard or even just some apple trees in your yard that you're growing for fruit, you want to make sure you don't have any of these around, because there's a disease that spends part of its life on this tree, but then it also infects your apple trees and makes a rust on the fruit.
This is purple coneflower. Purple coneflower is a wonderful plant for a pollinator garden. Really good at attracting butterflies, especially. You want to collect these seed heads. And here's one where you don't want to use a bare hand. It's best to flip it off like that and get that seed head. And then I'll show you this a little bit later if you're interested when we get back. You do want to be able to crush this seed head. If you take a look at that, I'll kind of rotate it in the sun. Do you see the little white things in between the black spines? That's where the seeds are. And so you really do have to crush it. But if you try to do it with your hands, you're going to get spines and things all in you there. Oh, that's it. Purple coneflower is a native prairie plant, but it's not native to Wisconsin. It's native to the southeast U.S. Yet it's really been widely planted in prairie plantings. It's a very, very common plant. It does tolerate our cold winters and does just fine. If you are interested in collecting some of these prairie grasses, often all you have to do, put your hand below the seed head, pull up like that, and you'll have the seeds in your hand. Another one is this one, and you see how the seeds kind of all hang off to the side? This is prairie drop seed. It's one of the shorter grass prairies. It's the same thing, put your hand underneath, pull up, and you'll have a lot of the seed right there. I would say if you're trying to plant a prairie wildflower garden, concentrate on the flowers. You really don't want as much of the grass. you'll end up with something that looks like this, where I think most people would rather see more flowers for a garden type setting. Here's more of the prairie coreopsis that we saw earlier. Yellow flower.
Oh, look.
Here's another one of those fall blooming asters. You'll see this now real commonly in ditches along the roadsides. This is New England aster. And you can see it comes in different colors. You can get it kind of like a pinkish purple to purple. I've seen some that are almost blue. There are cultivated forms sold in garden centers that are a real bright pink. That's very, very attractive. Common plant, little tiny wind-blown seeds, so it often shows up even if you don't plant it. In here it was included as part of the seed mix that was planted in this prairie. A wonderful butterfly plant. As I picked this one just now, there was a butterfly on it.
Oh wow.
A little yellow,
You meanie.
a little yellow sulfur butterfly. He's still out there flying around on the other plants.
Is it true that the purple flowers like that are often in fall? You know, more than other times?
Particularly at least these asters.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I would show this lovely plant here. This is called multiflora rose. Back in the day, conservationists encouraged farmers to plant this plant as a living hedgerow because it has horribly nasty thorns on it, and if you plant a hedgerow of these, then you don't have to maintain a fence to keep your livestock out, because they're not going to come anywhere near or try to go through this. It has these, the thorns on it point backwards down towards the roots, so that when you try to walk through it, they're especially effective at digging into your clothing and your skin, and I have many a scar on me from multiflora rose, and it's very prolific, and even in woodlands where it was pastured, it was one of the few plants that the livestock would completely leave alone, which means when the pasturing stopped, that was the primary seed source that was there. So you found old pastured woodlands that were just inundated in the understory with multiflora rose.
What was found here and there throughout southern Wisconsin, along with prairie interspersed with oak, which we call an oak savanna. And this is the other one. It's called big blue stem. It's one of the other big tall grasses, along with the Indian grass that I pointed out earlier.
Like a snail or something.
The interesting thing about this one, I didn't see this until I cut it and picked it. This is the egg case of a praying mantis.
Oh.
Yeah. If this will not hatch until next spring, and of course if we do a burn, it's going to end up being destroyed in the burn. But I had a couple of these in my backyard, and I have been finding praying mantis pretty regularly now in fields. And as far as I know, it's the actual species is Chinese praying mantis. The American one's a little bit smaller, but they're big insects. They're almost 5-6 inches long. This time of the year, they do this. They lay this kind of foam-like egg case, and then it hardens and dries. I once brought one of these into my classroom to show my students, and it hatched in midwinter. Got kind of interesting plant. This is in prairie native. Do you see how the leaves wrap around the stem and form sort of a cup? This is called cup plant. And you can see it's actually even got a little bit of rainwater trapped inside there. Sometimes it's like a little pool of water, and birds will land on there to drink on it. Birds also like to feed on the seeds of this. It's very much like a sunflower. So it looks very much like a sunflower. Yep. But if I rotate the stem in my thumb and fingers, can you see it's square stem? And even with the dried seed heads, yep, there's a real distinctly kind of minty smell to it. This is called dotted mint. Monarda punctata. It's really closely related to the bergamot that we talked about earlier, that has that sort of Italian smell. This is one that I usually find only in real dry, sandy, gravelly hilltop prairies. I've seen it in the Kettle Moraine on some of the ridges, but they included it in the mix that was planted. So there you go.
Oh yeah.
So you just measured the height and figured out it was 66 feet.
Yep. And I stood 66 feet away, ironically. That's one chain. And so now for the crown spread. Crown spread is 62 feet by 62 feet. So the way they assign points for champion trees is take the circumference at DBH, which is 4.5 feet above the ground, in inches, plus the height in feet, plus 1/4 of the average crown spread in feet. And that's the formula they use to assign the points. So the height and the circumference of the trunk are the dominating factors, but the crown spread factors in as well. And so I can submit these numbers and see where this tree ranks compared to the other champion shagbark hickories in Wisconsin. I'm going to take a GPS point, so if somebody wants to come back and check this tree out, they'll be able to find it. So we'll do that and see. And even if it's not a champion, it's still a beautiful tree. It's a historic tree, and it's a special tree on this property. So we can still love it even if it's not a champion.